Good evening. I know my voice isn't loud enough, so I had to ring the bell. Forgive me. My name is John Curtis. For those of you who don't know, I'm the current president of the Surry Historical Society. And before we begin our program tonight, I just wanted to let you know that one of our longtime board members and an ardent supporter, Marjorie Saunders, passed away this morning. Some of you know, some of you don't know, but it's a very sad event. Our sympathies are with her family and her husband Wilbur. And I believe at the municipal building in the fire department on Saturday, there will be a gathering in memorial of, is that true? What time? You know what time?
Noon to 2.
Noon to 2?
A potluck.
A potluck. Okay. Okay, so welcome to the Surry Historical Society, where the past is ahead of us, at least for tonight. There are cold drinks in the white cooler on the floor under the fire extinguisher, and there's a lady there who's going to guide you to the spot. So if it gets a little warm, please help yourself to cold water. And if you're not a member, we have Audrey managing our membership table tonight. She's right over there in the corner. Please don't hesitate. And if you are not getting our emails announcing these meetings, please sign the yellow email sheet in the table at the back. And just a reminder, if the stairs out front are a challenge, we do have a side entrance over here without stairs. Just the 2 stairs on the stage is all you'd have to negotiate. So if anyone's been staying away because of the intimidating steps out front, there is another way in. I wanted to thank some donors we've had in the last month. The lectern I'm standing at, which we've been looking for quite a while, was donated by the Arbutus Grange 2 doors down, and with a special thanks to Ida Reed and Sharon Minogue for making that happen. This is another donation. It says, Surry Police. There was a police department in Surry in the 1980s, and we've been collecting information to make a presentation probably next year. And this was just the latest piece that I've got. Louise Talkington gave that to me today. Louise, thank you, it's beautiful. And just one more reminder, the Historical Society is going to use the old village school in October to give 3 one-hour classes on Surry history. The dates are the 7th, the 14th, and the 21st. We haven't completely worked out the program yet, so I can't tell you the topics to be covered, but they should be interesting. There'll be new material that you haven't heard yet at the Historical Society. And we encourage you all to attend. We'll be advertising it more heavily as that date approaches. Now, at the Historical Society, we've been thinking a lot about Maine's 200th anniversary, which is coming up in 2020. So tonight, I came up with 4 interesting facts about Maine, just to get you stimulated about this. If you're not already, you might be. The closest U.S. state to Africa is Maine. We don't normally think of it that way, but Cordy Head Light in Lubec is 3,154 miles straight across the ocean to Africa. Is there anyone present who can guess what country you would land on if you went from Maine to the closest point in Africa?
Morocco.
You win a prize for that. Would you like to come up?
You want to know the town?
No,
studied in Morocco, so.
This is about alien attack. It makes sense when you hear the next fact.
Okay. Everyone's invited over for moving on.
Sit down.
Can you move a little bit that way?
It's going to put me off center.
What?
Okay. And by the way, if you were to drive to Imperial Beach in Southern California, you would be traveling many more miles than the distance between Lubeck and Morocco. Maine is a good place to sight a UFO. According to WNTW News 8 in Portland, Maine, they reported this in June of this year. Maine has the fifth highest number of reported UFO sightings per capita, exceeded only by Washington, Montana, Vermont, and Alaska. The total sightings since they began keeping records, I don't know when that is 940. That's quite a few sightings. Another interesting fact, the capital of Maine, you all know what that is, no prizes to that, has fewer people than the attendees at an average Giants football game. This is true, I'm not making this up. The population at the last census was just over 19,000. Now, this is our second quiz of the evening. We have one more prize to give out. There are two other capital cities with fewer population than Augusta. Would people like to guess one or both of them?
Concord.
Montpelier. You're correct. The other one, but we only have one more prize. So the other one is Pierre, South Dakota. Your prize, harking back to our last fact, is the 1951 version of The Day the Earth Stood Still.
We're all invited to the American Watch.
We'll have a watch party. Thank you. You're welcome. Okay, last fact about Maine, but not least. Maine had 5 governors in the 9 months between May 1821, just after statehood, and January 1822. That's just 9 months. They had 5 different governors. I'm not going to go into the details, it's rather lengthy, but we'll be dealing with this next year as we explore the history of Maine statehood. It's really kind of a fascinating story, but I'm going to leave it there. If you are interested in brainstorming with the Surry Historical Society to plan local events to celebrate Maine's 200th, there is an orange sign-up sheet on the table in back. Beside the sign-up sheet are 4 t-shirts that say Maine 1820. As a signing bonus, the first 4 people who sign up get to take a t-shirt. We'll be in touch with you, don't ask me when. We're just beginning to collect information and volunteers for whatever is going to happen next year. But please think about signing the list. It's really quite a fascinating subject. And before we begin the program, are there any announcements that people would like to make tonight? Okay. I have a goat story to tell you. Is it upside down? There we go. I just learned about this recently. I had a relative visiting from California who heard this story when she was a young girl from her mother, and she just happened to mention it to me, and it's the very first I've heard of it. It's a charming story. It took place in the late 40s and throughout the 1950s. Jimmy Anderson, who many of you know, lives at the Never Know Farm on the Toddy Pond Road, not too far out, a mile or two. He was born in 1941. When he was a boy, say around 10, he had 2 pet goats. The male goat was born on George Washington's birthday. So Jimmy named him George. Logical, right? They were studying George Washington at the old school. The female goat was born a few days later, and he named her Martha. So his pets were George and Martha, named after our President and First Lady. And he was in the habit of taking the goats for a walk just about every day. And he would walk into the village and go to Forrest Carter's store, which is the store that was there before McGraw's store. That spot is now the village park across from Pugnuts, for those of you who don't remember Forrest Carter's store. He would stay at the store. People loved the goats. He would stay at the store and people would pet the goats and have a good time. And when it was time to go home, he would buy a candy bar and split it between the goats. So they loved going to the store. They knew what they would get. However, once or twice, he went over to Willard's store right across the street. And Willard at that time chewed tobacco. So Willard offered Jimmy, who was 10, a plug of chewing tobacco, and he didn't want it. You know, you can understand that. But the goats, he offered it to the goats, and they eagerly chewed the tobacco. They didn't seem to mind. Jimmy kept the pets throughout their lives as pets. They lived to be as old as a goat gets to be. I'm not sure what that is. And when he took them to the store, he put them on leashes to keep them out of the road, to keep them out of the way of traffic. But there was a resident in Surry that nobody could keep out of the road. And his name was Horace Young. And I'm going to call on Kathy Engel to come up and tell his story.
Horace Young was born on May 3rd, 1856. He grew up on the Toddy Pond Road and for a time lived in Eden, Maine on the MDI next to Salisbury Cove. But he returned to Surrey. And in 1930 census, he was listed as a boarder of Eustace and Nina Dowse. And they lived on the corner house on the left, just as you turn onto the Morgan's Bay Newbury Neck Road. The first story which I will read was written by Henry Buxton, who was a Bangor Daily newspaper writer. He compiled a collection of his articles from his travels all over the state of Maine in a book entitled Assignment Down East, which was copyrighted in 1938. So this excerpt is from the chapter entitled Bachelors and Near Bachelors. It was quite by accident that I talked with my first Maine bachelor. I was hugging the stove in Roy Whitney's country store in Surrey when in came a smelt fisherman wearing a sheepskin coat, a pull-down cap, and felt boots. Horace Young's coming up the street, and as usual, he's right in the middle of the road. Set the newcomer in a slump down in a chair in the stove circle and began to fill a wreck of pipe from a piece of cut plug. He'll keep walking in the middle of the road until he gets killed, offered Whitney, the proprietor. To date, he's been nudged into the ditch 7 times by motor cars, but he keeps right on walking in the middle of the road. The select men have warned him, but Horace is so stubborn, he won't pay any attention to them. But my curiosity was aroused, and I walked outside. Far down the village street loomed a huge figure, walking squarely in the middle of the road. A speeding automobile had to swing wide to avoid hitting the pedestrian, and a minute later a truck turned sharply to prevent collision with the middle of the roader. And as Horace Young drew nearer, I saw him to be an aged, slightly bowed man of more than 6 feet in height, and with a strong, large-featured face. An abundance of white hair curled from underneath a cap, and his face was thick with a gray stubble of a nascent beard. He wore an ulster of ancient vintage and carried a cane. Young walked with shuffling determination like a man on snowshoes. I advanced to meet Young, and he stopped short in his shuffling gait as I confronted him, his eyes glinting rather suspiciously under the shaggy brows. "Do you mind telling me why you walk in the middle of the road?" I asked. Young bristled and stabbed in the snow with his cane as he sputtered, "It's nobody's business why I walk in the middle of the road. But I don't mind telling you, stranger, that I do it because it's my constitutional right. Yes, sir, my constitutional right." "But are you willing to risk being killed by an automobile in defense of your constitutional rights?" I asked. "I most certainly am," he answered militantly. "The Constitution of the United States was framed long before automobiles were invented, and there's nothing in the Constitution that says a citizen can't walk in the middle of the road." "But how about those automobiles that brushed you away from the middle of the road?" I inquired. The old-timer poked him disgustedly with his cane as he replied, "That last hit weren't a real hit at all. Some rascal reached out his hand as the car went by and gave me a shove. I'm not so damn green as I look, my boy. Lots of folks in this town think I'm green, but I've fooled them a couple of times." The thought that he had fooled Surry folks a couple of times seemed to amuse Horace Young. But now his large frame shook with cackling laughter, and the laughter grew in volume and wheezes and puffs and gasping. He leaned heavily on his cane, which bent almost double under his weight. "I should think that your wife would be worried about you walking in the middle of the road," I ventured. His merriment vanished so quickly that I was startled by the transformation. He straightened up with an angry snort, and his sharp eyes bored into me suspiciously as he ran a gnarled hand with the gray stubble of a beard. "Who told you I was married?" he growled indignantly. "I'm 80 years old and a bachelor, and I thank God Almighty for that. And you, fella, even if I were so unfortunate as to be married, no wife could deprive me of my constitutional right of walking in the middle of the road, and no one in this town can stop me either. Put that in your pipe and smoke it." And with that forceful declaration of independence, Horace Young resumed his shuffle down the middle of the road, his large frame swaying with the rhythmic motion of his sliding walk. Now, Horace Young also left an impression on Surreyites who remembered him in their writings, including my Uncle Johnny McGraw, who reinforced that previous story with this amusing anecdote in a chapter from his book, entitled Surrey Characters I Knew. There was Horace Young. He was a big man and very bow-legged. Horace always walked in the middle of the road. He had very large feet, and when he was walking north and south, his feet were walking east and west. When a car would come up behind him and blow the horn to get by, instead of moving out of the road, he would slowly turn around and tell them that he had a right to half of the road, and he was taking his half right out of the middle. And to get by, they would just have to go around. One night, after an ice storm, Jay Saunders and I, being Uncle Johnny, were sliding on the big hill just out of the village. We were going about 60 miles an hour, and as we approached the mouth of Morgan's Bay Road, Horace stepped out into the middle of the road right in front of us. We could not stop, but we tried to avoid him, and we were very close together. Jay hit his toes on the one side, and I hit his toes on the other, and we could hear him holler, so we went back to see if we'd heard him. And all we got for that was a little help. And finally, from an entry from Dr. Edward Clapper's diary, dated Sunday, July 21st, 1935. We do know that Horace Young went to church and exercised his rights there as well. Here's the entry. Lizzie Sweat called, bringing us some of her first blueberry pie of the season and a head of lettuce, and telling us that at church in Surrey this morning, she and Solly Trugy and Saul's children, Tom and Julia, sang in a quartet. And that Horace Young joined in. And a persnickety sister went over and asked him to be quiet. Whereupon he declared, I guess I can sing if I want to, and bellowed on.
At one time, Surrey had nine school districts. In 1803, there were 4. Newbury Neck, Rich's Corner, which is at the corner of the crossroads of the Newbury Neck Road, in the village, and in East Surrey. In 1820, they added 2 more on Toddy Pond, one at Cunningham Ridge and one further west. In 1836 and after, they added one in North Bend, one in Morgan's Bay, and one in Conneryville, which is a section of the Blue Hill Road. The town put the schoolhouses in those neighborhoods close to the biggest concentration of people to cut down on transportation. But in one instance, 2 men with big families didn't like having the schoolhouse so far away from their homes. They complained to the town, and the town did nothing, or they were slow to act. So one night, in the dead of night, the 2 men yoked up their oxen and moved the schoolhouse themselves to right between their 2 houses. They were adjacent. And that's where the schoolhouse stayed until it closed. Now, there are a lot of amusing school stories from Surrey. I'm going to have Richard Saunders come up, if he would, and tell us how he chose a high school. Surrey had a high school until 1925, approximately. It closed, so students, when they graduated from grammar school, had to pick what high school they went to. Ellsworth, George Stevens, perhaps Bucksport, whatever. Richard has a story about his choice. Richard. Step right up.
Really? Well, as you know, I'm Richard Saunders. And the story he said about Jimmy Anderson is correct, because Jimmy and I was born about 20 days apart. We went through school the whole time, all the way into high school. So I know Jimmy real well. He's a good friend of mine. I know his goals. I used to help feed him up there. Anyways, when I graduated from Surrey back in the 50s, I'm moving back in further than that. But I was born and raised right here in this town. And I've been going a long time. It took me almost 35 years to get back. I spent a long time overseas and all over the country. But to get back to the story from Surrey here, when I went to high school, we had no buses to get to high school. And I didn't know which high school I wanted to go. And Blue Hill and Ellsworth were the closest ones. I didn't want to go to Bucknell. It was too far away. And I had no transportation at all at the time. So I'd go out in the morning. Actually, this is when I had to go sign up for school. And I'd go out to the road, and my father said, well, what school are you going to go to? I said, well, I don't know yet. I'll tell you when I get there. So I'd go out to the road, and I'd go over on one side of the road, and I'd start hitchhiking. Cars would go by me, and nobody would stop. So I'd go back on the other side of the road, and I'd hitchhike to Ellsworth. And I said, well, maybe I'll get to Ellsworth. So I'd start hitchhiking. And I know it was about 5 times I crossed that road before I got I did get a ride, and finally it headed to Ellsworth. And that's where I spent my time in high school in Ellsworth. And I left here until 1960, and then I left here, went to service. So. Anyways, that's about my story. There is one more story I'd like to say. Has to do with your father, Sharon, and Richard and Danny McGraw. I remember I was working for Robert Carlo. I don't know if he ran the well drilling. He drilled wells here in Surrey back in the 50s. He had one on a hook. And he hired me to help him drill wells. Well, the first well that I was on was at Rena Bonzi's house on North Bend Road. I probably wasn't 14, 15 years old. I just barely could lift whatever I had to do up there, which wasn't much. But anyways, I used to go up there and I'd be sitting on the lawn watching the thing go up and down, and Danny and Richard would go by. And they wanted to know what I was doing out there. I said, well, I'm helping him drill this well. He said, well, you're not doing much. You're just sitting there. He said, you look like Chester. I said, who's Chester? He said, well, he was the guy that was out on the Toddy Pond Road. He used to sit on the front steps out there just rocking a wheelchair. So he gave me the nickname of Chester. So, boy, I tell you, it didn't take me long to quit that job and get away from it.
Now we're going to hear Bob Milliken tell us about the legendary and somewhat mysterious Camp 50.
First of all, you did say legendary, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Let's try to speak.
Speaking to the mic. Also in the newspaper ad for this gathering, John said the legendary shack, I believe he called it. Shack? Okay. Now, he has some justification for that. Because my father wrote an article that I just came across, because he was a journalist for a long time, as well as running gas stations in Freeport. But in that article, believe it or not, in 1968, he said, shack. I couldn't believe, he never in his life ever called Camp 50 a shack. Okay? It's not Cottage 50, it's not Shack 50, it's Camp 50. Okay? But at one time, my brother-in-law, his first time there, went to Camp 50. Okay, he'd never seen it before. So he's describing the experience there to other people. And out behind the camp is the outhouse. So he's saying, out behind the shack is an outhouse. So my Uncle Richard McGraw, Jane's father, said, shack? You're calling Camp 50 a shack? And I'll never forget that. In addition to reactions to camp, when Nikki and I, over a half-century ago, were dating, I said, hey, we're in Surrey visiting. Would you like to see my father's hunting lodge? Let's take a little trip and see the hunting lodge. So it took forever, and she said, where is it, where is it? And then she comes around and sees it. Didn't work out. Okay. So we have since the hats, we have the official t-shirts, sweatshirts, and so forth. And this is one of them. And I don't know if you can read this, but it says, exceeds all expectation. Now, where that came from was one of our newer guys, he's now about 50 years old, a young buck, right, from Massachusetts, came to camp and wanted to check it out. So afterwards we asked him, how did you like Camp 50? He said, I expected the worst, and Camp 50 exceeded my expectations. However, my niece who lives in Brewer took the shirt and took that statement and cut it down a bit. So it's much better now. I mean, I like it a lot better now. I should give a little background. My grandfather was Alston Milliken. His house was where Jane Smith now lives. He was born in Surrey, moved off for a while to Gardner. I think met my grandmother there because she was from Alna. And then came back when Dad was 9 years old, because my dad was born, Henry Milliken, in Gardner. And he lived here until 1937, after he and my mother were married in 35, and then he moved to Freeport and lived there for the rest of his life. And of course, I grew up in Freeport. So that's a story from the first picture. That's not it. Okay. That's the original camp. 10 by 12. My grandfather Alston built that, apparently prefabbed it, down here in back of Jane's house. And then they took it with a horse and wagon into the camp area, where part of that still lives. Now I don't know why the window, I guess the window had broken out, so they stuffed it up. And you can see the smokestack. It was all out of cedar shakes, the entire camp. Okay, let's see now, right? I gotta put my glasses on, sorry. Oh, I have, yes, Joy Small. Yeah, okay. A member of Historical Society. Her parents, according to her, married in 1925. Hope and Edgar Ingalls. Edgar was a very good friend of my father. Spent their honeymoon. And that tiny house, 10 by 12. Perfect, better than Niagara Falls, right, Nikki?
Well, my mother was only 4'8", so she didn't take up much space.
All right. See, that's a tidbit I did not know. Okay, the next shot. Okay, now this one is difficult to see, but the original camp was made for my grandfather's wood lot. It was for a wood cutter to go in there during the week to cut wood. And then he would come out to the village on weekends, okay? That's what that camp was for. My grandfather was not a hunter. My father was. And so this was after my father, this would be around in the 30s. And there's an addition which you unfortunately can't see well, but it's in the back, in here. Okay, but you can almost, I don't know if you can see it, but there, number 50 is on the door. Okay, and it's a huge smokestack. I mean, it's, you know, just bare tin, not metal asbestos. That comes later. Okay. Okay, now here are a group of original hunters. They didn't wear orange. They wore black and red wool. And I think the person that took that picture was my father's partner in the gas station, Marvin Camp. But on the left is Howard Weaver. I think he was from Castine. Dad said he was once town manager there. I don't know. And next to him, okay, moving from left to right, Richard McGraw. Okay. All right. Next to him, Henry Milliken, my father. Next to him, Babe Walsh, okay. LLB's barber in Freeport. Just for a little tribute. And that's the camp with the 6-bunk addition in the back of that area. And that added another 6.5 feet lengthwise. Okay, so now we'll go on to, oh yeah, the next picture. That's the interior of the camp. Okay. And there's Richard McGraw on the left, Howard Weaver on the right. You notice the stove is turned around kind of. Howard is face on to the stove. And that's because the other addition, the third and final one, had not been built yet. Okay, there's a kitchen table there with oilcloths on it. Okay. And the sink is over here, right there. and a water bucket. I mean, a lot of the doors still there, believe me, and the rafters, you know, we've changed a few boards. Okay, next. Oh, there's a picture of my father. Now, the bunk that he's in, I guess I wasn't observant looking at pictures over the years because I thought I'd been sleeping in his bunk all these years, which is opposite that bunk. You see, there are 3 on each side. Okay, so it's 6. Those birch posts that are there are still there. I thought birch, you know, gives up soon, but it's still there. And there's a rifle there. That window, not the original, but that window is still in that area. And the top bunks are not good to sleep in. It gets too hot there. And also, well, some of our modern crew, you know, they get into some kind of medicine or whatever it is, and one of them fell out from that bunk on the left in the middle of the night. And he was fine, because he'd already taken his medicine, I guess. Okay, I guess. Okay, this is the in-between Camp 50. That's the addition. Unfortunately, I don't have a good picture. I didn't find it until Sunday, and it was too late, right? Of looking at it from the other side, okay? So we put another window in. This was done in the 1950s, and I can remember when that was built. And look at this tap here. Look at the stovepipe. What do they keep adding? You know, on every year. You know, come on. And then there's a refrigerator, an old refrigerator that just, I mean, it'd be like an ice box. You know? And an indication of a modern innovation. Gas lights and a 2-burner gas stove. See, the gas tank's there. Uncle Richard, when he first knew that they were going to do that, he was just shattered. What's wrong with kerosene lamps, man? Come on. And the door is still, and I think that thermometer is still on there today. I mean, that's been there a long time. So this would be like in 1953, maybe. Okay. All right, thanks. Okay, that is more modern. And there's a different thing there. It looks like a 12-pack of Schlitz or something there. No, that's not it. Old Milwaukee or something? I don't know. But there's a water jug, a gas tank there, and the number 50 on the door. Well, this was after 9/11 because we put this patriotic flag up on top. And then there's an old set of antlers of a deer I shot way back when, and they've since rotted away. I haven't been able to replace them very well. And you can see the shininess on the top there, the smokestack. That's metal asbestos. Yeah, because when we replaced it, we noticed all the boards around on the inside were charred. Really? Really charred? Okay, the addition, which is on that. Oh, wait a minute. That's what. This is the outhouse. Right there. And the sign off to the left says "Danger Gas Leak." But it is closed at the back, open in the front, and it is sided with pine boards that are overlapping, and it is on cedar posts. And I have the material from Camp 49, near where we lived. There was a shower stall before it was, we moved the house in there, imported from Canada. That I have all the materials to build a new outhouse, but the crew that I have, I don't know what's, they don't want to build a new outhouse. They seem to like this one. But it's kind of tipping and, but it still works. But maybe someday when it collapses, they'll say, okay, why don't we just start on a little project? All right, now let's see. How much time have we got? Okay, I'll do one story and then another one at the end. This is a skunk story. This is back in the late 50s. I think we weren't married. Nikki and I were not married then. It could have been 1959 or so. And we had been smelling a skunk around camp. Okay. So it was obviously living under the camp. So one evening, I can't remember if there's anybody else, but I know Uncle Richard and Dad were there and me. And we hear this rattling out on the porch. And our dump at that time was, you just throw it out the door to the left. You know, you open the door up and throw out whatever's there. So we open the door up and there's a skunk with his head buried in the can, right? And I say, oh, you know, good. But Dad and Uncle Richard said, shoot it! You've got to shoot that thing. I said, he's going to be bothered. So, no, I'd rather not. But they talked me into it. So I got my 12 gauge pump shotgun and I fired one round at it from inside the camp, which is an explosive sound, as you can imagine. And then I'm looking at it, the thing is dead on the porch, and I'm hearing this little hissing sound. And then I saw this liquid come out from it. And I says, oh, Jesus. And then all of a sudden, boom, like that. Oh, my God, let me out of here. Uncle Richard goes out with me, and he's gagging and I'm gagging. And we went out behind it, and we had the gas lights set over the kitchen table, which is in the new addition. So we look back in at the kitchen table, my dad is sitting there. He gets the whiskey jug bottle and pours himself another drink, just as calm as can be, and lights a cigarette. And we can't believe it. It's horrible. And then the whole rest of that month, you could smell the camp from probably 100 yards away. All right, I'm going to cut that story. Okay, now. Yeah, this is the camp today. Yeah, roughly as it appears today. No, we did the outhouse. Okay. Well, that's okay. Okay. The one before was Camp in Summer. Not a good thing. I mean, this T-shirt was Camp in Summer, but nobody could stand it in there. You know, I was in there a week and a half with my daughter. Oh my God. The beavers are in there. The porcupine is underneath the camp now, I think, but there's chewed a hole through the camp, like down in here somewhere. Chewed a hole. I don't know. Things are falling apart here. Oh, you can see the metal Vestas pipe very well. That's good. It's very safe, and we now have a real cook stove. We have had them for years. We had one so bad once, I think Dad picked it up in Yarmouth for $5. A cast iron cook stove, right? That should work beautifully. One of my friends on the kind of new Camp 50 group was there one day sitting on top of the firebox where you put the wood in all afternoon, and he didn't get driven off by the heat. That lasted part of 1 year. Into the dump it went. All right, so anyway, summer's not a good, and this is a picture, this should be a winter picture. Yeah, look at that, huh? It's beautiful because all the stuff outside is covered up. See the picture there, the old thermometer, right? Oh, and you can see the addition quite well there, off to the right. And the outhouse creeping up over there. Well, I guess this is an ad for some kind of chewing tobacco, Grizzly. We nailed it to a tree, very appropriate. All right, where are we on the little list here? Oh! I guess I'll go to the end and I'll tell the last story. So let's go there. Little body Milliken. There I am. Right on the steps. I don't know how old I was then. Maybe 7, right? Cute little kid. What the hell happened? Huh? It's called aging, folks. Okay. The next one. Grandchildren Then, okay, my grandchildren now, we're gonna see 2 more, but they're now 17, 18, 19, and 20. So that is Cooper and Morgan Winslow. You can see the 5-0 very clearly there. And then again, yeah, my grandsons, Matthias and Riley. Same spot. And then I am in the last one. With a little bit older Cooper and Morgan. Right? And that's in summertime again. But we've done October trips, November trips obviously for hunting. I'm the last hunter. It's very disappointing. Go in there and those guys have been playing guitars. We have tried to outlaw all electronics in my generation when I've been in. But iPhones have ruined everything because they have to check up with their kids, they have to check up with this and that. So I can't have them like leave your iPhones at the door. They seem to have that sort of thing. But it used to be you could not bring those in. Like when Dad was there, his crew, they played cards. We have guys that can play guitars. I can sing a little bit. But other than that, and tell stories, and I guess drink a few beers. And that, as I was saying, I ended up being the only hunter. And sometimes when I'm hunting, I'm out on a cold, wet rock, and I'm so close to the camp, I can hear them, 5 people or whatever, having a hell of a good time back at camp. And I'm thinking, are you an idiot, Bob? What are you doing that for? Okay, I'll end with a story. Cousin Jane, you don't remember this. I don't remember how long ago it was, okay? But we used to do our trips in October. So one summer, because we came down to the summer camp almost every weekend, Jane mentioned to me that, hey, the hospital where she was a head nurse in Blue Hill is having a Halloween party. Okay. At the East Blue Hill Grange, I believe it was. Okay. So it came to the Camp 50 time, and I am in there with like 5 other people, and I say, hey guys, Cousin Jane invited us to a Halloween party over in East Blue Hill. And one of my friends had, I don't know if any of you remember this, but there was a Subaru that was called a Brat. And it was like a little mini pickup truck. And it had seats, 2 seats facing backwards in the bed, and it had 2 seats for the driver and co-pilot. And so we piled into that, 6 of us, right? And headed over to East Blue Hill. And we get there, and apparently the dance hall where this was being held is on the 2nd floor. So we walk up the steps, and there's a guy at the door. I don't think he was a bouncer, but he was like a greeter. You know? And he says, well, who are you? I says, well, we're here for the party, we're invited. Well, who invited you? I said, well, my cousin Jane. She works at the hospital, because this is a hospital gathering. You know? And then he says, well, okay, so he went to find her. And I'll never forget, Jane was wearing a fireman's outfit. And I remember this helmet, a little shiny helmet, and she's short, and she's looking up at me like, I could kill you. She was not a happy person. And then the guy at the door says, first of all, well, he had said invitation only. I said, okay, invitation. Well, I got it, right? Cousin Jane invited me. Who could be better than that? You know? And then he said, this is a costume party. We're hunters. Doesn't that seem like a costume for you? And he says, and also it's couples only. So we just start hugging each other. So here's 3 couples. How about that? Anyway, that's the end of it.
Ken Torrey, who passed away earlier this year, was a member of the Historical Society. And in the last couple of years, I visited him frequently, and he told me stories about his growing up in Surrey. And one of the stories was about some mischief that he and his friends got into. They called themselves the Musketeers. I don't know if they were 5 or 6 or 6 Musketeers. And one of the pranks that they did, the building you're looking at used to be the Grange Hall. Prior to that, it was the Methodist Church. That's why it looks like a church. They sold it to the Grange Hall down here, and that building burned down in 1939. So it's not the building presently there. Anyway, so this happened before 1939. They decided to take a smelt tent and hoist it onto the 4 spires on the steeple. It just about was the right size. But they succeeded in getting it up on the roof, but they failed to get it up on the steeple. So they abandoned it on the roof. So the next day, the town awoke to the smelt tent on the Grange roof, which was disturbing enough. But they were found out, and they were told that it had to come off the roof soon. They took it down, but that night they stuffed it with hay, dried hay, hauled it into the center of the road out here and set it on fire. So no one was injured, but it was quite a to-do. I think the fire engines came from Ellsworth. But anyway, that was one of his amusing stories this year. We miss him greatly. Next, I'm going to ask Kathy Engel to come up and tell us about a dancing bear.
So the event of this next story took place in 1888. It was told to Robert Jordan by sisters Susan and Anna Stinson, who lived across the road from him on the East Surrey Road, near what used to be the Gatherings Campground, near Contention Cove. Susan Stinson was born in 1880, and Anna was born in 1881, so they were 7 and 6 years old at the time of the story. And this is a verbatim recollection, so please do excuse the slur. The Dancing Bear. This was in the summer of 1888, when Sue and Anna were playing in the field west of the Stinson house with the Truigy sisters from across the street. One of the 4 looked down the hill and saw 2 men and a bear coming up the hill. The Truigy girls ran to their homes. Sue and Anna ran into their homes to hide and telling their mothers about the 2 men and the bear. One man, without the bear, called at the Truigy home, asking for food. Mrs. Truigy gave the man a sandwich and a loaf of bread for the bear. Mrs. Truigy and the girls were then invited to come across the road to see the bear dance. And the other man had gone to another house asking for food, and he received a loaf of bread and a sandwich. The men ate their sandwiches, and the bear had 2 loaves of bread. The men played a pin barrel organ, and the bear danced. And the children ran behind their mother's skirts, and the men and the bear then headed for Ellsworth. The men were probably gypsies arriving on the steamship.
Next up, we have some photographs and a story about a plane that taxied up and down the road out here. Audrey, I'll ask you to come up and tell us about that. This story was told to us by Janet Black Stanley, who was not able to be here tonight. But we have her description of the event.
So, Jan wrote the story as if she'd been telling it, so I kind of have to be Jan. And Jan often wears a blue chambray shirt, and I couldn't find one. This is the best I could do. Okay, so My grandfather, Floyd Black, had a nephew named Fred Black. Fred had been a military pilot, and later, as a civilian, he got his own plane. It was a small two-seater, Sky King type, maybe a Cessna. In the summer of 1956, when I was 9, he decided to fly from Connecticut to Surrey for the weekend. When he arrived, he landed successfully in the huge field across from our farmhouse. He was going to stay with my grandparents next door at what is now known as the Warren Place. He wasn't comfortable leaving the plane all by itself in our lower field. A plan was devised for him to taxi down the main road to get the plane over to my grandparents' house. And that's what they did. Two men were positioned at the end of each driveway to stop any cars that might have come by. I do not remember any. Imagine that, no vehicles. When he reached his destination, he parked the plane under the apple trees in the side yard and anchored it down. The next day, after visiting with my grandparents, he said he would take each of us for a ride. So the process was reversed, and he taxied back to the big field where he had landed. He had to take off alone, as with the extra weight of another person, he thought he might not clear the trees at the edge of the field, which could cause him to end up in the bay. Then he flew to and landed at an old airstrip in Blue Hill. We all drove over and met him there, and he took each of us, Arlen, Al, Floyd, and myself on separate flights. I loved seeing my school and my house from the air. It was very exciting for this 9-year-old. After we all had rides, he took off from Blue Hill and went back to his home in Connecticut.
Thank you, Audrey. Love the shirt. We have another airplane story tonight, a little more tragic than this. On February 12th, in 1943, during World War II, a plane of this type crashed in the waters off Newbury Neck, off the end of Newbury Neck. The plane was out of Squantum Naval Air Station in Quincy, Massachusetts. It was on a training flight, and it was piloted by Lieutenant John Shelley. And there was another crew member, a radio man, named H.A. Commander. Now, the accounts of this plane crash I had to piece together. There was a brief article in the Alfred American in February of 1943. There was an article in the Bangor Daily. They didn't agree on all of their facts. So I looked around to find a local eyewitness or somebody that could, tell me what really happened. So I talked to Ida Reed, who grew up in a house where, with her uncle Frank Hill and another uncle named Frank Grindle, and both had been involved in the rescue operation around this plane crash. So she related to me stories that she heard growing up. I think she was 3 years old when it happened. And we have a 2-minute video of her telling some of that, which I'm going to show at the end of this account. The pilot survived the crash landed, but the radio man was lost. Lieutenant Shelley swam toward a nearby island Goose Rock, even though he was weighted down with his flying equipment. His radio man, who he urged to swim and who he believed was following him, was last seen on the wing of the sinking plane. A wide search failed to locate him. Frank Hill was digging clams that afternoon at the end of Newbury Neck, and he witnessed the crash. He said the plane came in low between Bartlett's Island and Long Island and was obviously in trouble. Frank Hill was the first responder using his rowboat and was later awarded a commendation by the Navy Department. A group of Surry residents arrived later from the village, some of them from the village, and assisted. They were the postmaster Frank Whitney, Frank Brindle, Clifford Coggins, Percy Flood, and Percy Kane. By this time, it was pitch dark. And the rescue efforts were assisted greatly by prompt action by the Civil Air Patrol, which sent out planes that dropped flares so that they could locate the wreckage and hopefully the survivors. So the remaining details I'll let you hear yourselves from Ida Reed. Let me just set this up. A couple more photographs of this type of plane. This is Ida Reed's uncle, Frank Hill, the prime rescuer. This is her other uncle, Frank Brindle, who assisted. We should have started off by asking you to state your name.
Oh, I'm Brindle Reed,
And you were born in
1940.
1940. And your father?
Was Emery L. Brindle, and my mother was Phoebe L. Young. And that my grandparents were the ones that owned all of the land where the dock is today. Was my grandmother and grandfather's. And when I was a little girl, my grandfather's dock was still there. He did the same thing that they do it now. My Uncle Frank Hill and my Uncle Frank Brindle were two of the people that were on the neck. And the neck when the plane went down. They were clamming. And he told me that he rode the boat. They saw the plane coming in between Bartlett's and Long Island. And it was losing altitude. And when it got off that little island that they call Goose Rock on the end of the Newbury Neck, that's only an island at high tide. They couldn't see it for a second or two because they were on the beach near the cottage. And then when they looked out towards the point, which is high head, looking from the cottage out, the plane went down. And Uncle Frank Hill, my Uncle Frank Hill, told me that he put his boat in and he rowed out. My other uncle was on, Frank Brindle was on the old side of the peninsula, and Frank Hill was on the Elsa side. He rowed out and got the man that was swimming, but the other man was on the wing of the plane. He said he didn't know if that man could swim or if the suction of the plane going down just took him with it. They don't know, but they never found him, or they never saw him again. He said he heard the plane coming, and it was making an awful noise, and they had to look up, and they saw the plane, and they saw it when it went down. And then by the time they got the man to show up, the people from town were down there. But that's a long ways from town.
One more little story. In 1980, Nora Bunny, who was a longtime summer resident of Surry, wrote a paper called Summering in Surry for 40 Years. The places, the people, the changes, personal observations and reminiscences. She wrote a very amusing piece about George L. McCain, who was pictured. This is what she said. George L. McCain was a caretaker for some years, our caretaker. He was an insurance agent, a real estate agent, as well as a carpenter and a painter. He was also the proud possessor of a master mariner's license, which entitled him to be a captain of sail or power vessels in all 7 seas of the world. One fall, Dr. Marshall Smith asked him to paint all of his window frames and sills while he was gone in the winter, so they would all be ready when he returned in the spring. When Dr. Smith did return, it was to find bright new paint on his window frames and sills, but they were all painted shut. He tugged and pulled and pushed and banged, but to no avail. Finally, he called George Elmer. "Listen, George Elmer, the paint on the windows looks great, but I can't open them. They are all stuck fast." "Well, yep," said George Elmer slowly. "They'll do that." We recently have found out some new detail about the Kane brothers and other members of their family. We're working on a presentation for that next year. And that concludes tonight, but I want to tell you about next month's presentation. We are honored to have Surrey author Susan Ann Shetterly come and talk about seaweed. Now, you might think that seaweed isn't the most exciting topic, but I have read her book and I couldn't put it down. I mean, it was as enthralling as a bestseller for the knowledge that it imparts about this vital resource and what's happening around us in Surrey and other places in Maine. So I hope you all will be able to come and hear her next month. Just a reminder, there's cold drinks in the back, there's refreshments. Please partake, and thank you all for coming.